Welcome everyone to Austin Startup Week, and a special welcome to the New to Austin track. We'll have 2 sessions this afternoon, as well as some networking to get to know other attendees. Before we get started, I wanted to introduce myself and share why I'm excited to be the track advisor and your MC today for the New to Austin track. I moved to Austin 10 years ago on a bench assignment for 1 year with IBM, and I'm still here. I was able to find a really blossoming ecosystem, both in technology and the startup ecosystem, and hope that you find the same. I am now an entrepreneur in residence with Math Venture Partners, and I'm really excited for all of the sessions this afternoon. If you're new to Austin, one of the things to know is that everyone is really friendly and it's really genuine. It's going to be really easy for you to get networked in this city, and this is the best place to start if you're looking to get networked within the Austin entrepreneurial ecosystem. Hang tight. We're going to come back in about 14 minutes and we'll get started with our first session. I'll see you then.
Hey y'all, I'm Jason Ball, President and CEO of the Round Rock Chamber of Commerce, and I just want to welcome you to the New to Austin track. Our chamber is thrilled to be part of Austin Startup Week and so excited to welcome y'all here. For those of you that haven't heard of Round Rock, we are just 15 miles north of downtown Austin, right along Interstate 35. And you may not have heard of Round Rock, but you have definitely heard of Dell Technologies. One of Texas's biggest success stories, and they are right here in Round Rock, where they have been since they moved out of the dorm room and into their global headquarters in Round Rock. They now employ about 13,000 employees on that campus. Other businesses that we have in Round Rock that are startup successes: Infinitum Electric, which was founded in 2016, is now disrupting in the electric motor industry. And then one of my favorites, Round Rock Honey. It started with 4 or 5 hives of bees collecting honey. It's now available online and in shelves in more than 1,000 stores across the country. So the thing that we want to make sure people are aware of about Round Rock is we're a community that's got all the amenities of the Austin Metro, but we have access to lower operating costs. We're a great place to scale up, and Round Rock is one of the fastest growing cities in the country right now. It's a really fun time to be here. With all these benefits, we're thrilled that you're going to have an opportunity to hear from a guy named Brandon Cates, who started up his company Ametrine right here in Round Rock as part of the Why I Moved My Company to the Greater Austin Region panel. Again, we're thrilled to be just part of this event. We thank Capital Factory and Austin Startup Week for having us. Our team would love to talk to you about what your company could get in Round Rock. And so please check us out online at roundrockchamber.org. Again, that's roundrockchamber.org. And we would love to help you out and grow here in Round Rock. Thank you.
Welcome back. And thank you so much for telling us a little bit more about Round Rock. That's just one of the many suburbs around Austin where you can be able to start your company. We're going to get started with our first session at 1:30. So we'll see you back here in about 11 minutes. All right, everyone, welcome back. I'm happy to introduce our first session, an intro to the Austin startup scene. Are you an entrepreneur starting a new company? Have you recently moved your company to Texas? Do you want to find out how to connect with other entrepreneurs, mentors, and investors in our startup ecosystem? We're so excited that you're joining us virtually to hear an overview from experienced entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, investors, and community partners at the Intro to Texas Startup Scene and Ask Me Anything. I'm happy to introduce our speakers this afternoon, Jill Klinvex from Capital Factory and Claire Hansen from Firebrand Ventures. Thanks so much for being here. Really excited about the panel discussion this afternoon.
Us too. Thank you so much for having us. We're looking forward to diving in.
Great. Well, I'll leave it to you to get started.
Thank you
Thanks,
so
Elisa.
much, Elisa. Claire, how are you?
Hey, I'm good. How are y'all doing?
Very good, very good. Well, I'm super excited for this chat today. For those of you that don't know, Claire is a very dear friend of mine, and this is our first time actually chatting publicly together. So,
Ooh.
really excited to dive in. So, Claire, thank you so much for joining me on the stage today. You have an absolutely fantastic background. I've loved following your
Thank you.
journey. In fact, you actually used to work at Capital Factory, where I'm at now. But if you don't mind just sharing a brief background of yourself and your journey to now being a principal at Firebrand Ventures.
Yes, of course. Yeah, and thank you for having me. And to our attendees who are new to Austin, I just want to say welcome. And if you're not here yet, we'd love to have you whenever the time is right. Yeah, so a little bit about me. I grew up in Las Vegas. I went to school in Southern California and eventually made my way to Texas to attend grad school at Texas A&M, which is not far from Austin. And as Jill mentioned, I started my career at Capital Factory back in 2015. I was primarily doing operations for the accelerator program, which was a much smaller team at the time. It was pretty much just me and one other person working on the fund and accelerator side of the business at Capital Factory. And back then, I didn't know much about startups, to be honest. And I definitely didn't know what venture capital was, but got a quick education in the basics in that role and eventually ended up running a large angel network based here in Austin called the Central Texas Angel Network, or CTAN for short. And it was there that I really developed this passion and interest in continuing my career in investing in venture capital. During COVID, I switched things up a little bit and joined a corporate venture capital or CVC like group with the Army, which was a change of pace for me. Also based here in Austin, where my team helped source and diligence startups for Army contracts. And I wasn't there long before John, one of the general partners at Firebrand, reached out to me and kind of convinced me to come on board in a more traditional VC role, which is something I had been looking for. And I started at Firebrand in August. So it's been a little bit of a journey these last 6 years working and investing in Austin, primarily in early stage companies, so pre-seed through kind of Series A. And I'm excited to, share more about this ecosystem and place I've called home with y'all today.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that's so cool about your career and just funding and financing in general is that you've kind of been in each of these different categories. So from the angel group and CTAN to actually like non-dilutive funding and grants with
Yep.
the Army, and then, being at an institutional fund doing, traditional venture capital investments. So there's a lot that I obviously want to dig into here because each of these areas are so unique. And, all the startups that are moving to Texas right now, venture funding isn't always the best option for every company. Some people bootstrap, some people are looking for grants. There's so many different ways to finance your company. But do you mind just digging in a little bit deeper and kind of sharing about these different types of financing, from angel funding to non-dilutive grants to the government, and then also kind of traditional venture capital?
Yeah. I think we can scratch the surface here, but this could probably take a full 30 minutes to dive
Oh,
into.
it
But
for sure could.
yeah, so we'll just cover the basics here for anyone who's new to fundraising or maybe a first-time founder. As Jill mentioned, when you think about funding your business, your mind might go straight to venture capital. It's kind of sexy right now. Believe it or not, it wasn't always a sexy industry to be in, or maybe you've been watching Shark Tank and just have that stuck in your head. But there are a ton of alternatives to venture capital financing. One of which are non-dilutive funding opportunities like grants, and that's primarily what governmental institutions offer. So when I was working for the Army, I got really familiar with more non-dilutive grants. And I think the first thing to point out with non-dilutive funding is it's called that because you're not actually, as a founder, selling any shares of your company when you take on non-dilutive funding. So you will leave that transaction owning just as much of the company as you did, after the transaction as you did before. So again, like I said, oftentimes with non-dilutive funding, they're coming from those opportunities are coming from the government. It's not in exchange for equity, so you're not giving up, you're not diluting your ownership in the company at all. And typically, non-dilutive funding is structured almost like a contract where there are obligations and a certain timeline given to the recipient. So, for example, with working with the working with the Army, a company might receive, for example, like $500,000 in non-dilutive funding, but then they would be expected to perform over a certain period of time. So they might be expected to produce an MVP that meets certain requirements within a certain time frame, as sort of, the strings attached to that $500,000. So that's a little more of what non-dilutive funding might look like. There are lots of different structures, so they're not always structured that way, but they're typically are expectations of the recipient kind of involved on a certain timeline. Angel investing and venture capital are different than non-dilutive funding, primarily because this is a true exchange for equity, right? So the founder is essentially selling a piece of their business to the investor, whether it's an angel investor or a venture capitalist. So both of these types of funding are more long-term than a contract or a non-dilutive grant might be. So with these options, you're kind of locked into a relationship with those investors who are now co-owners in the business, typically for the full life cycle of the company, as opposed to, like I said, a grant or contract that has a set end date. So, and then I'll break it down just a little further here. Again, I know we could spend all day just on this topic, but the biggest difference then between venture capitalists and angel investors is that VCs typically raise money, or they don't typically, this is kind of the definition, right? They raise money from other investors, typically large institutions, and then the VC invests that money on behalf of those investors. So a VC's main goal is to make the money back so they can repay their investors and hope to make a return. So they're sending their investors more money than was originally given to them. And the VCs get to partake in that upside. So there's a lot of incentive for the VCs as individuals to make investments that perform well. On the other hand, angel investors are investing out of their own pocketbook. So they might have an allocation of money devoted to startup investments, which are typically fairly risky. So it might be a small portion of their financial portfolio. And they typically invest in companies very early on, sometimes even before a company has a product. So their motives for investing can vary. Of course, they're going to want to make their money back, but they might also be a former entrepreneur themselves and want to give back. They might want to support entrepreneurship or a certain vertical or a certain mission with their dollars and want to put their money where their mouth is. And so angel investors are really important piece of the ecosystem, because without them, many companies wouldn't get to the stage where they're eligible for grants or able to pursue venture capital funding.
That was a very thorough breakdown. I want to write a whole blog post about that now. No, it's so interesting, all the different options that founders can go to, fund their business. And I think it's really important for them to know all the options that are available to them. Definitely. Because, some folks end up selling way too much of their company early on when they decide to maybe do, venture capital funding for their business. And they end up, by the time they go to sell their company, they have maybe, 5% of the company left, which is really frustrating for all this hard time and effort you've put in, all the blood, sweat, and tears, just to get a, a little return at the end. So I think it's really important to educate founders about the types of funding that are best for them. And one of the ones that you most recently worked in was, the non-dilutive funding with the Army. And, so Capital Factory, for those of you that don't know, we do a lot of work with the Army and the Air Force, and we love helping our founders get non-dilutive funding. But a lot of people, I would say, when they first hear about getting these grants from the government are like, well, we're not a defense-focused company, but, the government is looking for all different types of technology, not just things that can go on the hands of the warfighter. But in your opinion, Claire, and just your experience from working at the Army, what type of companies would you say are best positioned to, successfully raise money from the government? Is there a certain type of industry, technology, or business model? What were you seeing in your role?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think it's tough to find a perfect product market fit with the Army. If you have a product, especially a tech product in the commercial industry that's really successful, sometimes it's hard to find a direct correlation to an Army use case or a government use case. So I would say that the companies that are best poised to raise non-dilutive funding or go into business with the government, actually you probably want to have some key lighthouse customers already established in the commercial industry, I would say, so that you have revenue. If you're already profitable, that's even better. But I know at the stages we look at, that's often not an option. But if you have some core customers that aren't going anywhere, and you can look at the government contracts as more of a long-term play rather than a quick sales cycle type of model that we're used to. I mean, really, that's best because that's going to give the government contractors a chance to work through their processes, which are getting better and getting easier for non-traditional companies to enter. But there's still a pain. There's still a pain in the butt. So I would say just making sure that your business model is steady and that you can survive without counting on the government contracts coming through. It's a little bit of
Mhm.
of like bad news maybe, but really you want to be thinking about if you're not entirely focused on government contracts, you want to count that as like icing on the cake, right? The cherry on top
Mhm.
rather than a core piece of your business model, unless you've got a ton of experience working that system, the government system, and really know how it works.
Mhm. No, for sure, and I think it's really important for founders to know when going in. I would say traction definitely helps overall for
Yeah,
any type of funding or financing
for sure.
when going. Yes, and so going back to your kind of first step into VC with CTAN and doing angel investing there, I've heard from a lot of founders just in casual conversations about the pros and the cons of raising money from angel groups and some of the cons I tend to hear that, angel groups generally charge at least, $50 to $100 just to be able to even pitch to them. The process tends to be a bit long and drawn out. And then, maybe at
Yeah.
the end, an investment's not even made, which can be really frustrating for a founder that, puts in a lot of time, does multiple diligence meetings. But in your opinion, what would you say are some of the pros of raising from angel groups? Like what value do they actually bring to the table?
Sure. Yeah, that's a really good question. And I will also say that a lot of angel networks are structured as nonprofits and they don't have a ton of resources or staff to really be innovating their models, although many of them are trying. So I would first of all caveat the conversation with that. And to let y'all know that every angel network is structured very differently. So even if you have a negative experience with one, you do your research and see if there are angel networks. Like think about the pain points you experience and try to find an option if you're still interested in raising from angels. Look around at the different angel networks and see if there's one that is maybe a better fit for you and your goals. So I'll caveat this whole conversation with that, of course. And you're right, though, Jill. Sometimes working with angel networks is super painful. It's not quite as painful as working with the government. So that's the good news. But yeah, some of the positives are, it's really one of the best methods, I think, to pitch to multiple investors at once with a relatively low administrative burden on the founder, right? So even if you might pitch at a demo day, your email gets passed around or it's on your slide deck, you might be getting emails from like 10, 15, if you're lucky, more individual investors who are interested in your company. And honestly, they probably all have very similar questions, right? So you're kind of taking your time answering all 10 of those individually with their own unique personalization. With an angel network, there's typically a staff member or one specific rep who gets assigned to you within the group, who's kind of doing all that administrative work for you. So kind of tapping all the members who are interested, finding out who is interested versus who's just kind of like being a little nosy or curious about the deal. And sending you all the questions at once, kind of keeping track of who's soft circled and who's committed in the round for you. So that can be a big help if you make it kind of that far in the process. Two other things I want to mention is that angel networks offer a lot more than just checks. Angel investors oftentimes have illustrious careers of their own, often as entrepreneurs. Some of them still hold really awesome positions, whether on the executive level or sometimes even as advisors. So you might find a customer or partner in that angel network, in addition to potentially finding a check. And then the last piece that I want to mention that is a little more subtle, but if you really listen to the feedback you're getting, even if it's not formal feedback in the form of like written feedback you might receive from the angel network, but you're listening to the questions that angels are asking along the way, that's going to tell you a lot. It's going to tell you a lot about what questions are answered in your pitch deck, what could be more clear in your pitch deck or your pitch, and kind of where investors have concerns. So I would say that's a more subtle thing you can just kind of look out for throughout the process, to help inform your path moving forward, whether or not it's with that angel network.
No, absolutely. I think, being able to get a lot of people in one room, kind of, knock out one pitch, be able to answer all of the questions at once
Yeah.
is really helpful versus, having to answer each of these individual questions, kind of one off, which can be a little bit of a pain, and draw out the fundraising process. So I want to switch now to a bit more about your job at Firebrand. Big congratulations on your new role. I
Thank
know you're
you.
really excited about it. I know your team is really happy to have you there. But for those in the audience that are not familiar with Firebrand, can you just tell us a bit more about the firm and your overall thesis?
Yeah, of course. And thank you. By the way, I'm very excited to be with Firebrand. We are a $40 million fund. We focus on software investments, and we typically write our first checks into seed rounds. So we're writing usually 500K to $1 million checks into seed rounds, and sometimes a little more. And we will follow on as long as we can into the companies that are performing well. So of that $40 million, we'll probably make between 22 and 25 investments. And then, like I said, we reserve a lot of funds to continue following on. Our thesis really revolves around the founders and investing in founders that share the same values that we do in terms of authenticity, transparency, being humble, being passionate. So we really look to invest in founders who are willing and interested and engaging in that sort of relationship and openness with us, and are seeking that type of dynamic with their investors. It's not for everyone. Some folks are more comfortable with a more transactional model, and that's okay. But we want founders that are really bought into this idea that, hey, we can be full humans with each other, and be open about the issues we're facing within the company, and as well as sharing in those successes. So just a little bit more here. That thesis is really the brainchild of our two general partners. Chris is based in Boulder and John is based in Kansas City. So it's just the three of us. It's me, John, and Chris. So we've got Kansas City covered, Boulder, and now with me in Austin, we cover a good territory right here through the center of the country.
I love that. Well, we've heard such positive sentiments about Firebrand, the community, and you guys have such a positive reputation, for being super founder friendly, really, digging into the company and getting hands on. So that's something to be really proud of. And I love that, John and Chris are in Denver, or Boulder and, Kansas City. I think it's really interesting, obviously, 2020 and 2021 and the whole pandemic. We've obviously been seeing waves of firms from the coast, flock to those smaller cities like in Miami, Portland, Denver, and of course, Austin, where we are. I think some of the most recent ones that have come to Austin are, 8VC, Baer Capital, we had Sapphire Ventures, but I feel like every day, every week, we're hearing of new firms coming down here, which is really positive for the founders. There's no lack of venture funding around these parts of town, that's for sure. But for Firebrand, what was kind of the impetus to make their first Austin hire, which is you? And what do you guys kind of expect this will mean for your firm moving forward? Can we expect to see more Texas investments?
Yeah, that's a good question. So you're totally right. The venture ecosystem has changed so much in the past couple of years. And since 2015, I mean, it's just night and day. So yeah, it's a really fun time to be here and be part of this ecosystem. For Firebrand, Austin was always a really key community to tap into. In fact, our fund one, our first fund, had a focus of primarily investing between the coast. So Austin was a natural and sort of obvious target for investments. And we even had a partner based here for a short time with Fund One. So I'm technically not the first Firebrand employee in Austin, although I am the only one now. And for us, having me here, leveraging Austin and the greater Texas ecosystem opens up not only, of course, all sorts of new opportunities here, which, yes, I'm super excited to get some Texas portfolio companies into our fund too. So yeah, absolutely. We hope to make some investments down here. But me being here also frees up the partners to explore and grow their communities that are more geographically close to them. So yeah, I'm not really sure what Chris and John think about this, but I'm excited to see us expand our territory maybe in Fund 3 even further north. So I will be covering Texas for the foreseeable future. And maybe in the future, Firebrand will expand or have some more folks here. But for now, I think I've got it covered.
Good, good. That's great to hear. And obviously, we're kind of in this whole remote first world anyway. So,
Yeah.
you and your partners can obviously cover different territories, don't have to be in person together, which is really cool. And I think one of the silver linings that came out of the pandemic for sure. But I'm curious maybe how how this remote first model has affected Firebrand, your investments. A question that I like to ask
Yeah.
VCs a lot is, have you guys actually invested in any companies now without meeting the founder in person? This is something that a lot of funds would never do before, but
Right.
I'm curious to see what you guys have done.
Yeah, that's a good question. And that's definitely has been the biggest shift for us during COVID. With our thesis so focused on the founder and the relationship that we have with our founders, it was one of our steps in the process to go visit and have a meal, if not spend more time with a founder kind of in their, in the city that they're in, kind of on their turf. And obviously
Mhm.
we didn't do that during COVID. So yeah, we've made a handful of investments without meeting the founders beforehand. We were kind of forced to, but we prioritize health over travel and meeting face to face. So yeah, we have made a few investments without meeting folks, and there are even a couple founders that we've invested in that we still haven't met. So there are a
Wow.
couple.
Okay.
Yeah, there are a couple. I think one in Detroit, one in Austin, who I'm meeting this week, who I'm super excited to
Wonderful.
catch up with in person. But yeah, there are a handful we still have not met in face to face.
Hey, it'll be coming soon, I'm sure.
Yeah,
There's nothing that can really replace that in person feel. It's just so wonderful, when you can finally be back in person and seeing everyone. But
yeah,
that's great. I always love asking because some firms were super opposed to it and kind of paused investing during the pandemic, and then others kind of just adapted. So it's always wonderful to
yeah.
see. But you all recently made an investment in a company called Assemble, which I was reading an article about this week, which it looks like it's more of a master-like class platform. And all the content is really focused for the Black communities. And I read that it should be launching in November publicly. So I'm really excited to stay tuned for that. But I'd love to hear more about this most recent investment of y'all's. Obviously, you guys are investors alongside really notable folks like Arlen Hamilton, who have been really leading the way forward for marginalized and Black communities. But would love to hear more about Assemble and why you guys are excited about being investors in this company.
Yeah, thanks for asking. We are super excited about Assemble as well. I will again caveat this with we're typically focused on more B2B type models, but man, Assemble, the value prop there was just so compelling. It caught our eye and we couldn't help but invest. What we loved about it, yeah, the founders were fantastic. Like I said, that's core to our thesis. So when we meet a founder that kind of checks the boxes in terms of values and their aspirations and their goals are aligned with ours, that really goes a long way. And that was true in this case, not only for the founders but for the business and the business model as well. It was just so mission driven. As you mentioned, the platform is essentially a master class for the Black community, and we just found that sort of thesis so compelling. Finally enabling people of color to learn from people who look like them and whose careers they aspire to, and woven into the content, which is a piece we really love, is that instructor being open and honest about the challenges they faced in their industry, and in getting to where they are today. So that was a really important element of those stories and of those platforms that Assemble is really doubling down on. So yeah, overall, we love the story and the market. The market's obviously underserved, and we love the founders. It also helped in this case that we were introduced to one of the co-founders through an LP. So one of our investors introduced us to the deal, and we were already kind of good friends or co-investors with another investor in the round. So we were able to kind of have a speedy due diligence process. And yeah, the Assemble platform is launching on Black Friday in November. So if you're interested in checking them out or subscribing to some of their content, there will be more news on that shortly.
Oh, wonderful. I love that they're launching on Black Friday. That's too funny.
Yeah, it's badass.
And they are led by diverse founders, which I think is awesome. I think it's great when the community that's starting the company actually,
Yes.
obviously knows the market, has experienced a lot of those same issues. So really love seeing that. Is this an area of focus for Firebrand? Are you all focused at all on, diversity, equity, inclusion, or was this, just an opportunistic investment for you all?
Yeah, that's a good question. Investing in diverse founders isn't an explicit focus of Firebrand, but I've noticed, I haven't like done the math or the figured out the stats, but just from first glance, looking at our portfolio, especially through Fund One, it is fairly diverse, and I think that's a result of our approach.
Mhm.
We encourage folks to drop the curtain, and we don't stick to the traditional investor founder relationship, which can be transactional or feel a little cold. So being open
Mhm.
to having those more authentic relationships with our founders, I think that's just a natural draw for all types of founders.
For sure. No, and I think it's great that so many of these groups are starting incredible companies. Like the quality and caliber of companies is truly impressive. It's something that you don't have to focus on, and you can just find fantastic investments. So absolutely love that. But congratulations on that investment. We're excited to see it launch on Black Friday. So everyone, stay
Me
tuned. Mark your
too.
calendars. But now I kind of want to talk a little bit more about Texas, because obviously we're both Texas girls, love Texas so much. But
Yeah.
you've been investing and working in venture here for 5+ years now. So you are super smart, have the opportunity to invest in companies anywhere in the US or in the world. But I'm curious, why are you excited about Texas, and why do you choose to actually invest here?
Yeah, that's a good question. I moved to Austin initially because it was just like calling to me. And maybe some newcomers kind of have that feeling too. I lived in the Bay Area briefly before moving here, and even back then, 2015, Austin just felt like the place to be. Like I was just drawn to it. So, yeah, now almost 7 years later, I still feel that same way, which is cool. Like people often ask if I've ever thought about leaving, and it's every time I think through it, like the answer is just like no. No, I'm
You're
going to
not
be here
leaving
for a
us?
while.
No.
Yeah. So I think just to dive in a little deeper, I've been thinking about this since you sent over this question. But Austin and Texas in general is just like a truly like fun and collegial place to work. We're known for having a collaborative spirit, and you really feel that when you're here. It's almost like an intangible, but I think that's really it. Like people are really here for each other and to support one another, whether it's personally, professionally. And that carries over into the ethos of the founders and a lot of the funders as well. So, in general, I find the founders here to be really passionate, super respectful, and just imaginative. And that sort of environment just makes for, I think, a healthier individuals and a healthier community. So, yeah, that's just where I thrive. I think most people do, supportive community. So yeah, that's why I'm here, and that's why I love investing here as well.
I agree. I agree. And I think what's so cool is that, obviously we've had a huge influx of folks coming from New York, San Francisco, LA. I'd say it looks like Miami's taken most of the New Yorkers. We're getting a lot of the Californians over here. But I love that everyone that moves here really adopts, kind of that Southern hospitality, Southern spirit. It's really interesting to see. And especially all of us rubbing off on each other. We
Yeah.
take, new philosophies and, new habits from the Californians. They're getting our Southern hospitality. So it's really cool to see. But obviously, there's so many factors that kind of came together over the last decade to make Austin one of obviously the leading startup cities in the world. We have, in the heart of downtown, we have UT Austin, which is a huge feeder institution. We have other, local companies here like Whole Foods, Silicon Labs, a lot of other, large tech companies like Facebook, Google have regional headquarters here. So, there's so many different, corporates and great talent pools that are, flooding into Austin. But I think something, that's come out of this pandemic is that, work from home and remote are obviously taking precedence. A lot of people are only wanting to apply to jobs that are remote now and allow for this flexibility. But I'm curious from your opinion, why do you think it's still important for companies to physically come to Austin to like launch and grow their companies versus, maybe having them remote and distributed?
Yeah, that's a good question. Like I said, there's like an intangible value in being here, truly with the support and collaborative ecosystem um, that you just can't get being fully remote. And I think all of us in Austin really crave that community. So I think that's really special. The other thing I would say is just like you got to be here to see the magic of the Whole Foods on 6th Street, right downtown. That's essentially like a testing ground for any CPG product that's recently launched, right? It's that sort of magical, like confluence of variables, entrepreneurship, creativity, technology, innovation. That's just like you got to be here to see it. I don't know if that's a great answer, but it's really just that intangible quality that I was talking to in the earlier point that just draws people here. And when you're around that, I think it pushes you to become, more collaborative, more creative, more imaginative yourself.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with that. And for the folks that are in the audience, in about 10 minutes, we're going to switch to questions from you all. So just put your questions in the chat, and then Claire and I will be able to answer those. But Claire, I think one really cool thing about your role in being an investor is that you have insight into all these new trends before many others do, because, before these companies are launching, they're coming to you seeking funding. Personally, in the last few months, myself as an investor, I've seen a lot of new trends, particularly in aerospace, brain computer interface technologies, and a lot of ed tech as well. That's kind of the three primary things I'm seeing coming across my desk right now. But in your role, what kind of market trends are you seeing in Austin, and I guess generally the greater Texas area? And what trends are you most bullish on moving forward?
Yeah, that's a good question. In terms of what I'm bullish on, honestly, I'm still learning. Firebrand has been the first role I have where I kind of have autonomy to pursue what's interesting and inspiring to me. So I'm still
Hmm.
figuring that out a bit. But in terms of trends, yeah, I've definitely seen a lot more ed tech come on the scene, and even our investment in Assemble is an ed tech platform, an area where we didn't imagine investing, prior to recently. So yeah, we're definitely seeing the ed tech trend as well. And then one thing I've been noticing, and Jill, I'd be curious to hear if you all are seeing this as well, is just so many more innovations in the consumer sector, and primarily consumer technologies. So I'm
Hmm.
seeing a lot of companies nowadays come to us with a consumer first product, or a product that has a consumer offering, but also a business or an enterprise offering, which is
Hmm.
different for Austin. When I moved here 6 years ago, it was a B2B town. All of the products I was seeing were being sold into enterprises, into SMBs, so businesses selling to businesses. And nowadays, I'm seeing so much consumer tech, which isn't necessarily my specialty, but it's so cool. And
Hmm.
as you mentioned, I think it's just a natural sort of next step. Entrepreneurs and all of us have been stuck at home for a long time, and we don't just need to hack work anymore. We want to hack our lives and get
Hmm.
down to those human elements. And yeah, it's kind of the time to be to be innovating in the consumer space. So I'm excited to see where that takes us. And some of us B2B
Mhm.
investors might have to get on the consumer
Having
space.
to switch a little bit. I know
Yeah.
it's interesting you bring that up. We are definitely seeing a lot more consumer technology, and I think part of it is just due to the fact that, during the pandemic, folks, aren't going in, say you are meeting with your therapist in person. You can't do that anymore. And so they're needing to create new platforms. So, I saw a lot of like consumer mental health platforms come out. Groups or companies like Clubhouse creating these spaces for people to meet virtually. But a lot of consumer technologies are coming out and emerging, which I think is really interesting because no longer, as you said, is Austin just this B2B SaaS town, right? We're having a lot of consumer technology. And I mean, CPG is huge here, which
Yeah.
is, for those of you that don't know, is consumer packaged goods. But obviously brands like Kendra Scott, Siete Chips, Yellowbird Foods, Austin East Ciders, like there's so many CPG brands here. Personally, some of my favorite pitch meetings have been with consumer focused companies because you can actually touch the product, you can see it, you can taste it, feel it, which is so cool versus, as much as I love software, and they tend to provide good returns, it's not quite as tangible, and there's something special about that. And I think there's so many, great groups in Austin that are really supporting those communities. One that you mentioned is, Whole Foods, which is this huge testing ground for all these different CPG brands, and I'm sure some consumer technology as well.
Yeah.
So it's really cool to see, Austin evolve and expand into so many different industries outside of B2B SaaS, which a lot of us investors do love. But before we switch over to, questions from the audience, for founders that are, listening in, what is the best way for them to get in touch with you? I know investors have a lot of different preferred platforms, so I'd love to make sure anyone who's listening in today can get in touch with you.
Yeah, that's a great question. I am not very active on Twitter, like I know a lot of
You're
investors
not in
are.
VC Twitter? Come
I'm
on.
not really in there. I mean, I think my last tweet was like complaining to an airline during COVID. So
Trying to get your
don't look at me on
refund.
Twitter, but I am pretty active on LinkedIn, and I read my email typically. Not every day, but I do read it at least a couple times a month. So email on LinkedIn always works. I'm also my email address is on the Firebrand website. So if you're raising a seed round that you think fits within our sweet spot, feel free to read through the thesis more thoroughly on the website, and then feel free to reach out to me, and I will let you know if it looks like there's potential for a fit.
Wonderful. All right. Well, we're going to open it up to questions from the audience now. We have a few waiting on us. The first one is, do you see ancillary startups related to the major tech companies in the Austin area?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. When I think about the big players here in Austin, I think more about talent, right? So
Hmm.
um I was just on a call with an entrepreneur the other day who like four of their engineers got snapped up by AWS just recently. So I see it more as a reversal, like the big companies often are swooping in on the talent, especially in this market. So that's more of what I'm seeing. I don't necessarily see a lot of startups popping up that are supporting or really like leveraging partnerships with big companies here, but that's just what I've been seeing. Jill, have you seen anything different?
I think one thing that we've seen that's just really interesting, Google's done a lot of good work. I know they have
Oh
their,
yeah.
for example, like Google for Black founders that they, give out a lot of grants. So I think they gave, upwards of 25 plus grants. This is a little bit of a like fringe topic for it, but, larger tech companies kind of helping the smaller, startups really help them grow and, kind of achieve that product market fit. Because for these larger tech companies, they're obviously looking at a lot of acquisitions. It's really hard for them to innovate. And, honestly, they kind of fear the startups a little bit because the startups can move so fast, push out new product. And so these larger tech companies definitely need to be supporting the smaller ones and, making sure that if there's some really good technology that they can maybe snatch it up, do a little
Yeah.
acquisition. Um, okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much for answering that, Claire. Our next question is, with the explosion of money flowing into ventures in the past few years, Are you seeing more competition for deals on the VC side? And if so, how can founders take advantage of that position? I really like this question. That's a good one.
Yeah, I mean, yes. I think is like the simplest answer. Like, yes, term sheets. So, like VCs offering a term sheet or getting into a deal is definitely pretty competitive right now. I had a colleague tell me even a company he had been mentoring for years before they were even ready to potentially raise from his firm. He still had to really fight to get into the round once they were ready to raise around that firm could invest in. So yeah, it's definitely competitive. A lot of what I've been seeing is round sizes inflating. So right, a seed round might have typically been $1 to $3 million. Now we're seeing $3 to $5 million seed rounds, 3 to 8 million. Like they're basically taking as much money as they can get. And just recently in the news, I saw a seed round for a car insurance solution for $21 million. So that's part of what we're seeing is also, the rounds just getting bigger, which means each investor is getting a lower ownership percentage. Valuations are getting higher. And how can you take advantage of it? I mean, now's the best time to be raising money, I think, like in history, right? So how can you take advantage of it? Build a killer product, be a killer founder, right? Like build a product in the space you're an expert in, and get some traction. I mean, nowadays I do see folks raising money even pre-revenue, but I think, man, revenue and the start of that hockey stick growth will really take you a long way and really get you smart money in this environment rather than just checks.
Yeah, I mean, it is a founder's world right now. I'm not going to lie. And I would say, VC's love language is definitely FOMO, and wanting to get into the round. So it's so cool to see. I think even just from what is it, not even a year ago when the pandemic hit and all investors were on ice, kind of supporting their particular portfolio companies, getting them through. It's definitely a VC's world being, I would say, taking advantage of lower valuations, but VCs, the ball is definitely in their court, but it is a founder's world right now. The world is your oyster. Go out there, raise your money. It's definitely a good time for founders. We have another question. What specific edtech startups are you, Claire, excited about? And maybe you don't even have to talk about specific ones, but perhaps just maybe some of the concepts behind it as well.
Yeah, well, I think like we've talked about Assemble a lot. To be honest, ed tech is not my area of expertise. Platforms like Assemble that just have such a niche and untapped market are really what we're interested in, or what I'm interested in. I wouldn't speak for Firebrand as a whole, because like I said, that's not typically our sweet spot. I think the other piece with ed tech is like any solutions that can find a way to, and I'm thinking like K through 12 or even collegiate level, to companies that have a business model that circumvents the typically long sales cycles, are gonna win or gonna find more interest from VCs, I think, unless those VCs have a specific expertise in selling into those types of sales cycles. So that's my take. Like I said, it's not an area of expertise of mine. We did do like 1 or 2 ed tech deals during my time at CTAN and then Assemble, but it's not a space I have a ton of experience in, to be honest.
Wonderful. Well, that wraps up all of our questions for today. Claire, thank you so much for joining me. This was a blast. It was so fun to do this with a close friend of mine. And for those of you that are in the audience, don't forget the best way to get in touch with Claire is either through InMail on LinkedIn, or you can find her email address on the Firebrand website. And if you ever want to get in touch with me, my email is just jill@capitalfactory.com. We really look forward to hearing from you all. So thank you guys so much for tuning in today.
Thank you. And thank you, Jill.
Of course. Have a good one.
Thank you so much, Jill and Claire. That was so very helpful. And it's always wonderful to see 2 powerhouse women who are working it in VC. Welcome back, everyone, to our second panel this afternoon on why I moved my company to Austin. I know that 10 years ago when I moved here, I didn't think I would be here for this long. What's kept me here in Austin, most importantly, has been the amazing supportive community, especially within entrepreneurship.
I'm really excited to introduce the host of this panel, Josh Baer, who will kick off and lead this exciting discussion with a bunch of founders and new venture firms that have arrived here in Austin. Over to you, Josh.
Hey, Lisa. Good to see you.
Good to
It's been a
see
long
you too.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for helping run all the activities this week, I guess, and everything going on. It's been great to reconnect after so much time with everybody being apart. So good to see you.
Great. Good to see you too. Have fun with the panel.
Thank you. Awesome. Well, I'm really glad to be with you all today. Let's go ahead and bring up all of our panelists that are with us here. And really glad to have you all join us. This is, of course, one of my favorite topics, why we moved to Austin, something I've been talking about for a long time, kind of since I moved here, a couple of years ago. And we've got a really awesome group that's here with us today of some just really interesting different entrepreneurs from all different sectors and working on a lot of different things that came from a lot of different places. So I think we'll have an interesting conversation. We only got about 45 minutes, which I think is probably going to fly by. So I've done this before. I actually have this little timer, this little hourglass. And when I remember, I'm gonna like flip it over, and I'm not gonna show it to you, but I'll be kind of watching. And if if things are sometimes things can drag out a little bit. I might give you, if you hear a little tapping, that's like your little hey, you hit the end of the thing. Might be time to think about moving on, letting the next speaker go. Anyway, really glad to have you all. And I know a little bit of all your stories, but excited to hear more of it today. So first, I want to go around and just give everybody a sense of what an amazing group that we have. So if we could, the timer is about 2 minutes. Take 2 minutes and tell us a little bit about yourself and your company, what you're working on. Don't go into about why you moved to Austin yet. Oh my God, look at this cool little prompts coming up. I didn't even know that was going to come up. Don't tell us why you moved to Austin yet, because I don't want to spoil it. That's the next question. But first, just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're working on. And Amy, if you don't mind, let's start with you.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me, Josh. It's always a pleasure. Great to meet you, everyone, and nice to see some familiar faces on this panel as well. My name is Amy Sun. I'm currently the founder of a startup called Daylight. My background is I grew up in Boston, very cold, very different from Boston on the East Coast. Grew up there, went to college on the East Coast as well. Moved out west afterwards for my first job. Started my career at Microsoft out in Seattle. Quickly was drawn to the Silicon Valley startup scene. Joined Uber when it was still considered a startup, and worked on growth there, specifically for drivers, and saw that Uber grow from about 500 people to about 15,000. Was switched over to product while I was there. Spent some time at Facebook as well, and I spent the last 3 years of my career in venture capital at Sequoia Capital, working on growth stage consumer investments. And that really saw the startup scene calling back to me, and I really wanted to start a company for pretty much my whole career. So, made the leap, started my own company, and Daylight is a digital coaching company. So allows people to start digital coaching companies leveraging video and video annotation and asynchronous communication to scale up their coaching businesses.
Awesome. I know you well, and I've had you on panels and spoke with you a bunch of times, and I should have known to make you go last because you have such an incredible resume. It's hard to follow. So, but yeah, it's such a cool story. I wish we could go into all of it here today, but what a cool journey. I'm glad you ended up here. John Henry, you're up next.
All right, awesome, cool discussion, and hat tip to Capital Factory for always leaning into a great program.
Hey, wait, where are you right now, John Henry?
I happen to be in this really cool office space that goes by the center of gravity. It's the Capital Factory. I'm on the 5th floor. It's actually our first day here, so we're really pumped about it. And awesome. Yeah, my name is John Henry. Good to be with you all. I'm the very proud son of immigrants, first and foremost. My family immigrated from Dominican Republic, and born and raised in New York. It runs through my blood. And yeah, my background is really entrepreneurial. I left school my first semester at 18 to start my first company, which was an on-demand dry cleaner for film productions. So I snuck onto the set of The Wolf of Wall Street, and they became my first client. And then we did Boardwalk Empire, Law and Order, Person of Interest, White Collar, Amazing Spider-Man 2, Ninja Turtle, Spike Lee, what have you. So as an 18-year-old kid, I was schlepping laundry sacks through the train, literally, to a dry cleaning facility, getting them to clean it, going the next day, picking it up and delivering it. And that's how I started my business. And it bootstrapped it to about $1 million in revenue and sold it. And that was when I knew, that I love this thing called entrepreneurship. Did an incubator there that evolved into an accelerator, ended up co-founding a fund called Harlem Capital, where we invest in women and minorities. We raised a $40 million fund one. It was anchored by TPG. I did 21 or 22 deals there. So like Amy, was also on the VC side of the table. Much more boring side of the table. I'm just kidding. But also I've done a number of things on the media side as well. I hosted some shows for Gimlet Media, Washington Post, and most recently on that side, created and sold a show into Vice called Hustle. That was all about kind of helping small business owners take their business to the next level. It's a hell of a ride. But similarly, like Amy, you end up getting the bug to go back to the founder side. So create a company called Loop. We are an AI-powered car insurance company. We are vertically integrated, direct to consumer. And we recently, last week, closed and announced our Series A round. And so we're super excited to be here, rooted in the Austin community, and can't wait to break bread with you all.
Cool. Thanks so much for joining us today. All right. Next up is someone I've been really looking forward to meet. I've saw you on Twitter, and I've had a bunch of people mention you, Nicole Cardoza, founder and CEO of Reclamation Ventures. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're working on.
Hey, y'all. Thank you so much for having me. I moved here about a year ago, so relatively new to the Austin space. I'm from the East Coast. I currently run Reclamation Ventures, like you said, which is a venture studio committed to health and racial equity. It's kind of the home of a lot of my babies that I've started over the past few years. My work actually started in the nonprofit space. I ran a national nonprofit that brought yoga and mindfulness to schools called Yoga Foster. We've transitioned into a yoga and mindfulness app called for kids called Wellemental. We also run the ARD, or the Anti-Racism Daily, which is a national media outlet dedicated to racism and white supremacy and offering education and action for ways to dismantle that. We've raised over $3 million for the charities that we support. And we've expanded beyond the daily newsletter into a podcast, an editorial board, and some other fun stuff coming up. Let's see what else. I'm also really excited to be here as an artist. I'm a magician, and it's really fun to see art growing here in Austin as well. And so building a lot out in that space as well coming up. So that's me.
Do you have a magic trick you'll be able to do for us? Not right now before the end of the panel. Is there something we can pull together as part of our?
I wish, but it's gonna have to wait for another time.
I will have to give you more heads up. If I had known, if I'd done more homework, I should have asked you ahead of time. Oh my goodness! All right. Maybe I'll think of a magic trick. We'll see. All right. Well, so glad you could join us today. And last but not least, Brandon Cates, the CEO of Amatrine. Am I saying that right?
Perfect. Well done.
Amatrine, who is coming to us from the greater Austin area up in Round Rock, and really glad to have you join us today. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're working on.
Sure. Thanks for having me. I don't have any magic tricks per se. I do know how to juggle, but our company, Amatrine, I think some people think we do magic tricks because we make people disappear. I used to say that a little bit more flippantly, and then people made me aware that maybe we were part of the mafia or something like that. But we do invisibility. We make camouflage, very special high-tech camouflage for exclusive use by the U.S. military and our allies. And so I guess a little bit more about myself. I spent a number of years in the military, in the special operations community. After leaving the military, I came to Dell right here in Round Rock, Texas, and I got a start in the business world at Dell. did a number of different jobs there. But I think as a lot of veterans who leave the military go through a bit of an identity crisis where you realize that the thing you did before seemed a little bit more important and had a bit of a higher calling. And so I went through that myself and got the chance to work with some guys I served with in the military. And we worked on counterterrorism technologies. So the intent there was we were scouting the world really for problem solutions, really, whether that was a breaching solution or a sensor solution or software solution. We'd find the problems from the end users, such as like the FBI hostage rescue team or the border patrol or the military, and then we'd go out and source solutions across the world. A lot of those solutions took me to Israel, so I started working in Israel back in around 2008, and have established a lot of relationships there ever since. And our company was founded in Israel, Amatrine. So I joined Amatrine as a CEO about almost 4 years ago now, and we moved to Texas officially this year. We were doing some scouting work earlier, but we're probably the newest, I think, in the Round Rock area when it comes to bringing a business here. So that's us.
Awesome. Welcome. Well, great. Next, I would love to just dig in a little bit more about each of your companies. I know that's, I'm sure, part of, or what you're working on. I know that's part of what you're all excited about as well, but they're each so different. Amy, when I know we've had a chance to talk quite a bit about what you're working on, and so it's a little bit of a leading question, but to help people kind of put it in perspective. I mean, the idea of like going to a site to learn how to do something or meet a coach, like that's not really new, right? Like what's really different about what you're working on is the use of making it kind of like video, right? And it's kind of asynchronous. It's not like just a video chat, but you get videos and you can send videos back to the teachers and they can comment on them, right? And send them back to you. Why is, we talked before about timing and like, why now? Why is now the right time for what you're working on with Daylight? What kind of trends or big things is that really taking advantage of?
Yeah, and I guess the thing that really the medium that we chose to focus on, this like video feedback, it comes from the fact that I just deeply believe that the best way to learn or get better at anything is through the feedback from an expert. Like you can, take online tutorials, watch YouTube videos, like take online courses, but I think the thing that felt like it was really missing for me personally was this feedback elements where like, but how am I doing? Like I watched this YouTube video, like why is it that like I can't, like this makeup tutorial just like does not look the same on me as it does on the person I'm trying to learn from.
I have that problem all the time.
Yeah, I'm sure you can all relate. And I think the digital feedback component was something that I think what can be solved with technology. And you see the top athletes and the top professionals who are playing at the peak of their sport, they're all obsessively watching videos of themselves and like getting feedback from their coach. So we're trying to take that and make that more accessible to people and not only give them access to expert coaches, but also the tools in order to get this kind of like highly personalized feedback based on their own performance. And I think the why now is like traditionally a lot of coaches have not had the need to go online. The majority of their business, if not all of it, was in person. But I think with everything that happened in the past year, the in-person business dried up, and I think it just made people realize that like having more options and more avenues to acquire customers, whether that's like online, through social media, digital, it needed to be a part of their repertoire. Like they needed to diversify, and they became much more receptive to finding like digital customers in addition to in person. I think right now a lot of people have really embraced this like hybrid kind of working, just like we've embraced hybrid at most of our companies. So with that, there's an opportunity to give people access to this level of coaching that they might not have had access to in whatever town or city that they were living in. All of a sudden you can access like the best coach in the world, even if they're overseas or in a different location from yourself.
I have young kids, they're 10, 11, and 12, and all they do all day is both watch videos, record videos of themselves, send videos to their friends, whether it's, TikToks doing dance or whatever. They're sending them, getting in feedback and practicing. And they can, this style of being able to edit right on the video and put comments on it is something they're all familiar with. That also just seems like, from a timing perspective, something that just people are so much more comfortable with now that they might not have been even just a few years ago. So I think that makes a lot of sense to me too.
Yeah, I'm so impressed by the young kids. I can't wait for them to enter the workforce and just blow everyone's minds.
Yeah, totally. So, John, why is this the right time now for Loop? How is Loop different from other car insurance companies? You said you use AI, but pretty much every startup in the world says they use AI.
They all say AI, right?
Yeah, right. So like, what's different about Loop?
Yeah. Well, man, so many things. I think fundamentally, we are a truly mission-driven company that drives, that's our North Star, that drives our product development, how we hire, the decisions that we make as a company. And the reason that's relevant in insurance is because today, most folks in auto insurance are priced based on their demographic factors. So your credit score, famously, is 65% predictive for all top 10 carriers. Geico, Allstate, State Farm, every single one of them use credit overwhelmingly to price you. But in addition, other things like your income, your education, your occupation, all of these things collectively determine about 80% of your price. And that works really well if you're affluent and own your home and you can get the home and auto bundle discount and all these other things. But we believe that it unfairly categorizes a lot of people as unsafe risks because of their personal situation, even though they may not necessarily be any more or less risky than some of their other counterparts. But to me, it's bigger than insurance. Insurance, I've learned, is really like the invisible layer that underpins a lot of transactional activity in the States. You can't get your home without insurance. You can't get a whip, a car without insurance. You can't make investments without insurance. And when I took a closer look, I'm rooted in mission-driven work. My work at Harlem Capital was also rooted in bringing equity to financial services. And it just seemed like insurance had conveniently avoided the scathing, social justice-oriented scrutiny that consumers are demanding. And in the wake of the killing of George Floyd, July 2020, I'm sitting there thinking, wow, we can't have Puff and Jay-Z and all these people that I grew up with as our heroes. They're not gonna solve every problem. We have to endeavor to tackle the absolute largest problems that exist out there and believe that we're brave enough to go toe to toe with any incumbent worth any amount of billions and do it better. And so what we're underpinned by and our actual IP is phenomenal technology. We created predictive models that can anticipate where car crashes happen. We do this by ingesting on a nightly basis all car crashes reported at the state and local level. We have over 100 million car crashes in our database today. We then layer in weather data, traffic volume data, and roadway infrastructure data. So not only do we know all crashes have happened here on Brazos Street, but we also know the weather that occurred, which matters because precipitation and so on can change the conditions. We know if it was a blind curve, one lane road, steep road, and we know the traffic pattern. And so what it allows us to do is underwrite customers based on really dynamic measures that matter a hell of a lot more than if you were late on your student loans payment. And so the byproduct is really competitive pricing for baby boomers who sold their home and no longer have the home and auto bundle discount, millennials, immigrants, young people, you name it. And so we are vertically integrated. We secured reinsurance capacity. And when someone gets insured by Loop, which we're available only in Texas at the moment, you're being insured by Loop, serviced by Loop. We do the customer service, policy admin, we pay the claims, we do everything end to end.
And so the big differentiator, to sum it up, is instead of pricing it based on your economic status as your risk factor, you're looking at where you drive. That's
100%. We are the only insurance product in the market today in auto that is completely technology underwritten and has removed all demographic factors, which was a hell of a battle to get approved by regulators, by the way, but we got there. And I think the time is now, because I think that our mission statements is no longer a nice to have. I think it's a consumer demand. We must be rooted in honesty and transparency in financial services, especially for our communities. And we're glad to be that for folks.
Super, super cool. Awesome. So Nicole, how has your world changed during COVID? How has wellness changed during that time? I mean, seems like it's been really challenging. It has for me. I don't know.
I think that COVID just really emphasized like the vast disparities in who deserves to be well or who gets the opportunities to be well in our current system. We know that everybody deserves to, everybody should be well. I think that's an inherent right and principle that we should all be granted just by being here. But we know that those resources and opportunities aren't, equitably distributed. And so what we've seen is just more of an attention placed on what does it look like to make wellness truly accessible. We went through a really tumultuous time and we're still going through it, to be honest, where like our right to breathe was really placed center stage, between the murder of George Floyd and once again having a Black man saying I can't breathe during the midst of a pandemic, which is really literally just stealing people's breath away and making it difficult for us to breathe, and knowing that our breath can transmit a virus to another person. So what we've seen in this work is like, how do we make sure that this is center stage? We work with a lot of philanthropists that are redefining what it looks like to invest in organizations that are focusing on health or renegotiating what it means to be well, in their bottom lines and what they're going after. I also think it's really important that we continue to invest in the people most impacted, to advocate for their own well-being and offer that to other people. And I think the last thing, which I'm really excited about, is that we're expanding beyond what we define as support. I think we've really been relying on structural systems to keep us well. What I love that came out of COVID, what we also saw here in Texas in particular, and Austin in particular, during the freeze last winter, is that we really need to build community care and make that operationalized and substantiated alongside these structural systems to really protect us. And so through the various organizations that I have and the funding that we're doing right now, I'm excited to see a new definition of wellness move forward, and hopefully more people adamant about protecting it for all of us.
What's the name of your kids app again?
Oh, it's called Wellemental. So it's yoga.
Wellemental. I love that name. That's so great.
So we've always been working with schools to help bring, contemplative practices into the classroom. Obviously with COVID, what that looked like changed a lot. So our app is really designed for both parents and caregivers and guardians, including teachers. So expanding kind of like our work traditionally. It's also all designed for in centering the experience of kids of color and kids with disabilities. So we're the only mindfulness app for kids that offers stuff in multiple languages, and hopefully we hope that our kids will see themselves in the teachers that we have.
Cool. I can't wait to check it out. It sounds really, really interesting. Wellemental. Awesome. Well, Brandon, so I want to know how invisible does this really make me? Like, is this like, do I look like I'm wearing camouflage? Does this only work in the jungle? Is this like electronic camouflage? Like, what's the deal?
That's a great question. Invisibility is defined a lot of different ways by a lot of people. And one of the things we talk about, like when we're talking to, like when I'm talking to my mother about what I do for a living, I tell her I make the Harry Potter invisibility cloak. And that's her reference.
That's what I was hoping. I mean, that was what I was hoping. But
that's one of the things we talk about in the world we live in, the industry we live in, is what we call tactically relevant ranges. So, and I realize I'm the outlier on this group when it starts talking about this kind of an industry, but our war fighters deserve, our soldiers and those who protect us on the borders and wherever they're at, they deserve to have the best protection, whether that's body armor, technology, sensors, whatnot, and our stuff adds to that inventory. And the phrase tactically relevant range means I don't need to hide from somebody in this room, right? Because if you're in this room, we're about ready to get into a knife fight. Like everything else is out the window. If I'm trying to provide reconnaissance on you. I'm trying to observe your location. I need to be invisible at what they call small arms range, so maybe 300, 400 meters. If I'm in a vehicle and I've got a big gun on this vehicle, well, that may be 1,000 meters. And so we talk about tactically relevant ranges being the key term. And then really in the military, we talk about probability of detection. So if I'm on guard and I've got my sector that I'm supposed to protect, I'm scanning that sector, or maybe there's AI that is being used to scan the sector. What I want to do is I want to reduce my probability of detection by an enemy sensor. So maybe he sees something moving out there, but I look like something smaller than I really am. Or maybe I'm driving a tank and somebody observes me, but they think I look like a pickup truck. And so I'm not a threat to them. And so they're just going to let me go on by. So those are the kinds of things, and that's the way we think about it. It's not pure invisibility until we get to the magic and the magic shows and things like that. It's about reducing the threat to our warfighters. So
you don't really have an invisibility cloak.
Not that I could tell you about.
All right. Someday, maybe. All right, I was hoping.
That's right.
That's right. By the way, Brandon, thank you for your work. It's truly a matter of life and death, and I'm sure the gravity of it is something that you can feel. You guys keep us safe at home so we can be, in our laptops and thinking about all kinds of stuff. But, the gravity of your work, just want to thank you for it.
Well, I appreciated your statement about being mission driven, because that's what drives everybody here. This whole past 10 days, everybody in this office has been working until midnight and start in the morning, probably 5 or 6 in the morning. So it's been a bit of an insane run for us, but it's all because of the mission. So.
That's awesome. Yeah, one time, and it's not the same, but in a similar way, I got to do a flyby or fly over. I got to fly with some of the Austin police, helicopter police, and it was amazing to me what an incredible advantage they give to the police on the ground. It's really kind of Mission Impossible shit. Like, it's like they're up there with these infrared cameras, and you imagine some policeman on the ground trying to find somebody that's running away from them or is doing, did something, and they're themselves in a lot of risk because they don't know what's going on. And it's like God view. They can see everything in infrared, even footsteps people took and stuff, crazy. It was so cool. And it suddenly just made me feel so good for the people on the ground, that they were they kind of had this support. It was really cool. Awesome. All right. So let's talk about why we're all here, about Austin, and why you all moved here into this area, into Texas. I'm probably just going to keep in the same order we've been going. But Amy, I've told you this story before, but for everyone that has not been in a couple other panels with us, she spoke in my class a few weeks ago. I met Amy because she posted this to Twitter, I'm packing up my bag, getting in my car, driving across to Austin, to my house. I don't know if you've ever even seen it yet. So tell everybody, I know I've heard it, but tell everybody here, why Austin? Why'd you come here?
It was actually a bit of a sort of last minute decision, or an impulsive decision, I would say. I had lived in San Francisco for 7 years prior to the pandemic. And it was just one of those situations where we were in Soma, if you're familiar with San Francisco's neighborhoods at all. And we were living in a loft apartment that didn't have any doors, and our lease was coming up. And we're like, you know what, we don't really have to stay here. We were both working remotely, and we had actually planned to get married in the middle of, our initial wedding date was May 2020, right? And which, got canceled pretty quickly, pretty early on. And so we decided to do this cross-country road trip where we would drive to Boston and get married in my parents' backyard, and we wanted to drive back. And I think on our way back, it was the sort of apocalypse in San Francisco. Not only was COVID happening, but also this wildfire situation had completely blanketed the city. And we were just do we want to go back, or should we try a new city? And because we had been, making all these stops across the country and living in all these different cities, and we were exploring everything that the U.S. had to offer. And we were stopping by Austin, and I happened to have a lot of friends that were in Austin as well. And And it was pretty great here. Like we loved, the restaurant scene, the culture, the art scene, the fact that we had like a community of friends around here helped a lot. And so the things that I was looking for was like, I wanted there to be some sort of tech scene. So like a city with almost no tech would be really difficult, I think, for me to live in. And I wanted to have like a friend group, a community that I could really feel like I belonged in, and wanted to have access to nature and beautiful parks and great culture. And Austin had all those things. So we decided to move here and got a house, and it's been great.
So was Austin already on your list? Like, were you, if you were like, were you already thinking about it, or was it kind of just totally spur of the moment?
It was, I had like a list of like 5 or 6 cities that I liked that I would consider moving to if we were to leave the Bay Area, but it was not, but it was actually until we spent a little bit of time here and actually got to experience the city that we really like fell in love.
It's funny. I don't think your story is that different from a lot of other people. One, being one of the fastest growing cities in the country for almost like 20 years and fastest growing states, everybody knows people that moved here, right? Like most people have family that moved here, right? It's just like they know somebody. And then all it takes is like that one trip, usually for South by or something like that, where you come down in the middle of the spring and it's beautiful and like, and you're like, it's an easy, you eat great food and have a lot of fun. I can win you over.
I mean, cities are like the biggest network effect out there, right? We're talking about startups.
The original network effect, yeah.
It's like there might be some like a city that has like perfect amenities, right? It hits every bar, but if you don't know anyone there, it's still like very lonely, right? And I think so that factor I think is more important than anything, like having a group of people that who are like-minded and share your values, who are in the city already. Like that, I think that makes a huge impact and it's the tipping point for a lot of people.
Yeah. John, what about you? Why'd you pick Austin?
Well, I think, I've been a part of many different types of endeavors, companies, and projects, and we were always a small cap. Either I was bootstrapped or I was running a venture firm, which is kind of lean. And what I think about all the time is growing a $1 billion business and going public and having thousands of employees. I think about it literally every day. I have it written up on my board. And we're making progress. We were 4 people at the top of the year. We're 30 now. We'll be 100 into next year. And, when the quality of life for our team matters a lot to me. And as a born and bred New Yorker, you can make quite a handsome wage and still be living with several roommates in a 5th floor walk up and not have laundry in the unit, which, by the way, all of those are first world niceties anyway, because I grew up in totally different conditions. But when it comes to like the creative class and the types of folks that we want, that we're having involved, over from the call center to our C-suite, all across the board, we want Loop to serve as a platform to allow folks to earn a decent wage, have some ladder by which they can achieve individual wealth as well. 100% of our staff gets equity in our business. It doesn't matter if you're, customer service on the front lines or, VP of engineering. Everyone will have equity. We're pushing the bounds. We want 100% of our customers as well to have equity in the business, which means Carrie and I, my co-founder, are willing to take a haircut for our own equity and allow the communities that we insure and that power our growth to grow alongside us. And that's really driven by the record wave of liquidity that I saw as a VC. 86% of those profits went but to a handful of those firms, and those firms are in but a handful of zip codes. And so what you have is the retail investor, they're caught holding the bag because they go public and then endowments and everyone else buys into the hype. But by that point, everyone else has gotten rich, and then the stock takes the tank, and the $15K that you invested that might have been your savings is now worth $3,000, and you need to sell because you need the liquidity. that's a real haircut and a sizable hit. So it's really rooted in the idea and the premise of where could we go that could afford people a really, really great quality of life, where we can pay a living wage and that person can have amenities, niceties, be around nature, and all the things that Amy mentioned are important to us, but they were even more important to pass through over to our staff. So we're really excited about it, and the cost of real estate here is certainly growing, but still not anywhere near the tier 1 levels of San Francisco, New York City. So we hope to buy commercial real estate here and pay our staff wages so that they can buy their homes as well. And that was really the primary deciding factor in moving to Austin.
As I've been learning about, some of the different factors of racial inequity and different levels of trying to help address it, that's come up over and over again as a theme is, not just, for example, investing in Black founders but really, making sure that there are Black investors investing in Black founders, making money from like the whole circle, right? Or, owning the real estate as well that's being created around it and other things, so that it's really full circle. So Nicole, what about you? Your background's different than Amy and John Henry. They're similar, in some ways, right? Both from tech and venture, both, kind of starting on the East Coast. Why did you come to Austin?
Well, I'm actually more similar than not. I'm also from the East Coast. I was working in my nonprofit was a tech-based nonprofit. I think that I echo a lot of the similar sentiments as to why they moved here, particularly about how it can create a really wonderful living environment for our team as it continues to grow. But the main reason is because like all of the work that my organization is invested in, that I'm invested in, is really happening here in Texas on the front lines. When you think about anything from immigration to healthcare and reproductive rights to access to quality education to racial equity, like we are having those conversations and dealing with those inequities right here, right now, in a way that I think many other parts of the country, including New York City, where I spent a lot of time, doesn't have to face in the same way. Certainly we're affecting it everywhere. We also know that what happens here in Texas tends to influence the rest of the country. And I think that these next few years in Texas will be some of the most transformative, both for the state and for the nation as a whole. And so I think it's important that my work is based here, right? If I run a newsletter that's talking about this stuff every day, we should have our eyes on the ground. But, I'm also like a homeowner and a philanthropist and an investor. And I think it's incredibly important that I'm doing this work here too, personally as a Black queer woman. So that's why I'm here. I think that I could be doing this work anywhere in the country, but I'm hoping it makes an impact here. And I'm excited about building a legacy here. And hopefully inspiring other people to do the same.
That's awesome. So, Brandon, yours definitely is different. Where did you come here from? Remind me. So, did you come here from Israel? Were you in Israel?
So our company was founded in Israel, but when they moved to the U.S. initially, they based in Rockville, Maryland.
Okay.
I think there's a false assumption that if you're going to sell to the military, you need to be near the Pentagon somewhere, which is not actually true. But if you're moving a company from a foreign country, that may be the best advice you got is, well, I know where the Pentagon's at, I'm going to base my company there. It's when I first joined the company, we were venture backed, and I told the owners of the company, I said, why would you ever put a factory, something that makes something? If you're software based or services based, maybe the DC area is a decent place to base out of. But we were in a 10,000 square foot facility that had no room to grow up, left, right, didn't matter. We'd have to pick up and move at least 10 or 15 miles to add any more capability or capacity to that factory. And so we started the search looking at 5 or 6 different states. I think we had a total of 12 or 15 cities. And it was an open-ended decision matrix with tons of different criteria that we were comparing, from quality of the workforce, education, academic partnerships with science and engineering schools that we were interested in, connection to the end user, right? The Army, the Navy, the Marine Corps, whoever. Those were all important aspects for us. Having lived in Round Rock and in the Austin area for a number of years, I tried not to put my foot on the scale. And I tried to allow my team to really do that analysis on their own and come up with the numbers. And at the end of the day, this was the right place to come for so many different factors. And access to an amazing place to raise families. We had a bunch of folks in Rockville, Maryland that we have picked up and moved down here. And so that was a really big part of our story too, is really taking care of those families, giving them a place where they can raise their kids, be outdoors 12 months a year and enjoy themselves. And for us, a unique requirement for us was access to places to test our stuff. And so being near lakes that we can test our maritime platforms, or being near a range or a piece of open woodland or a farmer field that we can test it. You can't do that really in the DC area in a quick way. So that was a big part of our reason. And I would say the other thing, and Amy said this, I think, during her initial introduction, the thing I couldn't have put on that decision matrix was the intangible access to support. Like the level of people and just a number of people who've reached out and offered help, whether that's construction management, whether that's connecting us with an insurance broker, whatever it is. Anytime I think of a need, I know there's somebody in this community around here that I can call, and they will connect me. They'll be 1 or 2 steps away from the right person to help me with that problem. Software stuff, IT stuff, whatever it is. And that was something that we did not account for in our decision making. It's been amazing.
Oh, I'm super glad to hear that. Well, we only have a couple more minutes left. I just want to kind of open it up. Any last thoughts you want to share with the audience about any of the things we talked about, or why you're here?
I actually have a quick question for Nicole after her last response. I think the issues that you mentioned around like reproductive rights and voting access, we're in the center of some of these the greatest debates that will really influence outcomes for everyone across the country. As leaders in tech or as people in the community who want to do more, do you have any recommendations for ways that we should be engaging or help, whether it's through our own teams or through our communities or through our networks?
Yeah, thank you for asking that too. I think the more that we can elevate local organizers and activists that are doing this work on the ground day in, day out, the better. Particularly if we can give them a platform for their work to be heard, because I think oftentimes local leaders are usually confined to startup founders and not necessarily leaders that are actually shaping and transforming the culture that we get to experience. And I also think just allowing our teams to be able to be a part of these conversations too, connecting them with the resources that we find, modeling that we're listening and learning from what's happening around us, maybe even making time for our teams to learn about what's happening. Things are moving so quickly. Even if you think about what's been happening here in the past month alone politically, it's how can we just make sure that the people around us are resourced to be able to stay engaged as best as possible. So
what a great question.
Yeah,
great question, and kind of a great setup for me. And one of the points I definitely wanted to leave everybody with is a reminder that you may all not know about, as being somewhat new to Austin, about the Austin Tech Alliance, austintech.org. But it was an organization that was founded by Dan Graham from Notley and I 4 or 5 years ago, specifically to help increase engagement from the tech and business community and get more people registered to vote. We deputize voters within different companies who can then go get people in their company registered to vote, and try to help people be more educated about what's going on so they can find the right ways to plug in. And so that's one great starting point to all those things you were saying. How do you stay educated? How do you know what's going on? Companies can join, which get all their employees to be part of it, or as a person, you can go join up on the website as well. And it's really just a way to stay plugged in and know what's going on in Austin and to be part of it. And that's austintech.org.
I think one closing note I would have quickly is, for anyone listening, maybe on the fence about, moving geographically, it does not have to be to Austin. Maybe on the fence about a career change, maybe on the fence about any major life decision. I just think we're just at such a pivotal time that there's almost a blanket of safety that is welcoming of change. And I think 2020 will go down as probably the most pivotal year of the last century, potentially even in the next upcoming century. And if anyone needs that gentle push, or maybe not so gentle kick in the ass, go out there and get it done, because the world needs a lot of us that are brave enough to go and do it.
Hell yeah.
Well said.
Awesome. Well, nothing else, Elisa, I think we can hand it back off to you. But thank you so much to Amy, John Henry, Nicole, Brandon, all of you for being here with us today and sharing your stories and for being a part of the Austin community.
Thanks, Josh.
Thank you.
Cheers, all.
Thanks, y'all. Take
Good to
care.
see y'all. Take care.